What is going on, New York Jet fans? Hello, everyone. Welcome back here into another edition of NY Flight Jets Talk. As always, I am your host, Connor Long, and joining me today here on the show, a very special guest. You know him from his own YouTube channel. He used to read his work over at jetnation.com. Dylan Tereman joining us right here on the program. DT, great to be back with you, my friend. Since we last spoke, the season is over. We don't need to talk much about that because we're fully immersed in off-season mode. My friend, how you been?
I've been well, man. I am so glad to close that book. 2025
Yep.
season is just a binder on a shelf. We can
Mm-hmm.
turn the page. I've already created the Excel docs and Google Docs for 2026. We're prepping, and this is the time we can be happy. And even if it is just for a little bit until the season starts again, the team building part is so much fun to me that I can't let myself be that down despite all the negative reasons to not like this team.
And obviously, a lot of changes, DT, will come this offseason. After a debut season for Aaron Glenn, where the expectations weren't particularly high, the Jets, of course, did their thing and missed that mark. Ends in a 3-14 record, a disastrous season. Defensive coordinator Steve Wilks canned before the season even comes to its end. And now the Jets are out. They're looking for a DC. They completed their first round of interviews, which consisted of 8 candidates. Only one coordinator candidate, to my knowledge, has gotten a second interview, and that was interim DC Chris Harris, who initially joined the Jets staff last offseason as their defensive backs coach and pass game coordinator, and then took over for Wilkes at the interim the final 3 games of the year. Among those 8 candidates, Matt Aruhu, he was the Dolphins cornerbacks coach. It does not look like he will be returning. He was hired, I believe, by I think it was the Dolphins who brought him back in a higher role. So he is off the table, but now that leaves us kind of with 7 names to look at who can really, we don't know who's going to get this job at the end of the day. Everyone seems to be on even ground. Jim Leonard, obviously the fan favorite. From what I'm hearing, Wink Martindale is the early front runner to win that job. There are a ton of names. Just your initial thoughts on this entire list, the whole search, who you'd want to covet, who you'd want to avoid, and your overall thoughts as the Jets look for a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, as I've been kind of saying a lot of this offseason, there's definitely a positive and a negative spin that you can put on this DC search.
Yep.
One, you can say it's a lot of unknown coaches, right? Not necessarily the fan immediate reaction is like, oh, wow, I know that guy. That would be a great hire, right? You get that more with the Wink Martindale and obviously the Jim Leonard. But you have guys like Durante Jones, Ephraim Banda, Mateo Rujo, and Demarcus Covington and Jim O'Neill.
And Arujo, by the way, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. He was hired by the Jaguars, so he's off the table. I said the Dolphins about the Jaguars. So yeah, he's no longer on that list, but one of the more inexperienced options. Yes.
Yeah, and he was actually a guy that was kind of on my list, so we could talk about him first.
Okay.
He worked under Fangio in Miami in 2023, and he charted all Fangio's plays. Another guy on that staff who was the linebackers coach at the time was Anthony Campanelli. So now Arujo is going to work under Anthony Campanelli, and I'm sure Arujo will get his chance as a DC in some capacity in short order. But I'm kind of coming around to Durante Jones, the Minnesota Vikings, because of the trees that they come from. Brian Flores' tree, the aggressive, the disguise, the cover zero, like that is the stuff that I think is more modern to the NFL game today. And it's also conducive to I think he runs a lot of cover 6. If I'm not mistaken, he's the one that runs cover 6 in the Flores tree, and cover 6 is like that pass game mitigator because now we're just so pass happy. So Ephraim Banda, to me, the safeties coach from Cleveland, is cool because he's under Jim Schwartz. So again, a really knowledgeable tree. Maybe he has more versatile defensive fronts that he can deploy, but he comes from a safeties background. All these guys are coming from DB backgrounds, which is hilarious. But I like Jones and Banda, and then I actually don't hate Jim O'Neill. Yeah, he had pretty bad defensive coordinator experience, but he was also on Rex Ryan's staff. So if Rex thinks he's okay, then maybe there's an element of him that still is okay. And he has the obvious crossover with Aaron Glenn from Detroit. So I don't necessarily hate Jones, Banda, or O'Neill. I am kind of leaning out on Wink Martindale just because a lot of potential red flags that can crop up, even though I do think he has done a good job at times of making the most out of mediocre talent. But Jim Leonard far and away has to be like the number one guy. And the stars are slowly aligning, Connor, where things could happen, right? I don't think he's an actual contender in Green Bay. My buddy's pretty plugged into the Packers, and he doesn't think it's anything more than like fan folklore over there in Green Bay with Jim Leonard. Obviously, they want him, but that's an opening that is more attractive than the Jets. Let's just be honest. Durante Jones is getting looked at by the Packers as well as the Cowboys. And Brian Flores just got a new deal before we got on. So he's not the DC in waiting in Minnesota either. So if somebody takes Durante Jones and then somebody takes somebody else that we like, I mean, maybe it comes down to Wink and Jim Leonard, and they're just willing to wait it out to see when Denver loses in the playoffs. Hopefully they don't lose this week to the Patriots and they are playing in the Super Bowl. But if the Jets are willing to wait it out for Jim Leonard, because Aaron Glenn, the offensive or defensive minded coach, is already in place. Maybe that's the best path, is like just wait it out for Jim Leonard, because you can still come around and get the Ephraim Bondas, the Jim O'Neills, probably the Wink Martindales. Like Wink's not going anywhere else in the NFL, in my opinion. So you can come back to these guys. So just wait it out with Jim Leonard and see what happens, because he's a selective coach in terms of the interviews he goes on, but he came to the Jets interview. Maybe that's a courtesy thing. I totally get it, but again, there's a negative and positive spin to it, but I feel like the positive is Jim Leonard wants to come here and it's actually a thing. And then the negative is like, we could get Jim O'Neill and it could just be Aaron Glenn and him, and it's probably a bad defense.
Now, a lot to unpack there. You mentioned Durante Jones. He is someone who I really, really like, just behind Leonard for me, on guys I'd like to covet. The proven development track record that he brings, really helping turn around that Vikings secondary. Brian Flores leans on him as the right-hand man over there. His schematic philosophy aligns with that of Aaron Glenn. Jim O'Neill, I think we differ there. He would be a disastrous hire, in my opinion. This is someone who was out of football for a whole season, someone who Aaron Glenn had to come and help revive his coaching career and bring him to Detroit as an assistant. The last job that he really held of any significance was with Northwestern from 2021 to 22 as their defensive coordinator. He's already had 2 stints as an NFL DC with the Browns from 2014 to 2015, and then with the 49ers in 2016. Obviously, one of those ended in a one and done. I think he's had his chance. I don't think he's very impressive. I would pass on him. The only guy who I think would be a worse hire, who, frankly, unfortunately, is the only one the Jets have given to a second interview thus far, is Chris Harris. Like this guy, and it's nothing against Chris Harris, right? No bad will against him. From everything I hear, he's a rising star in the coaching space. But there is no way you can justify bringing him in to be their full-time DC. Over the 3 games, the interim, the defense allowed over 100 points, and he was the defensive backs coach and pass game coordinator for a unit that ranked dead last in pass defense DVOA, and did not haul in a single interception, a record that has now entered the NFL history book. So it doesn't make sense. He is more inexperienced, and also the optics look even worse, in my opinion. Like that just gives the fans more reasons to laugh at the Jets. And at the end of the day, seeing him get that second interview, that was quite telling to me, because what that shows me is that this job isn't very attractive. The Jets were denied access from some top candidates because they just didn't want to interview for the role. So now that they're giving Chris Harris a second interview and he's the only one known to date, what does that tell you? Probably that this job isn't very attractive. So I think even if we're looking glass half full at this point, I don't think you're getting Durante Jones. I don't think you're getting a Jim Leonard. I think the tier that you're looking in is an Ephraim Banda, a DeMarcus Covington. Like I think that's the tier that you're looking at. Banda, I know a lot of people really, really, really like him. The tree from Cleveland with Jim Schwartz working under him, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. Like I had him in the tier rankings I did for JetX. I had him and DeMarcus Covington in the C tier. Like just not the most inspiring, but I'm not gonna to put my arms up like I would with O'Neal, like I would with Chris Harris, like I would with Wink Martindale. Covington in particular, I just think it seems too quick to give him another DC job. Look, it was not fully in his control what happened with New England last year, just how bad that defense was. They were very, very barren of talent. However, look, I think he kind of needs to work his way back up. Like he had one okay year with the Packers as the defensive line coach and run game coordinator. Like I just don't think he deserves to get a DC job just 1 year after somewhat rebuilding his coaching resume. Now, DT, I want to kind of translate our focus over to
can I just push back on Chris Harris real quick? Not saying that this is not an attractive job, because this is probably not an attractive job based on the head coaching and defensive coordinator openings across the league. The only thing that it makes it easy to interview with Chris Harris is they probably can't get everybody in the building right away. He already is in the building, and he does get you half of the way towards the Rooney Rule. So that's the only reason that I feel like it was just easy to say, hey, you get the second interview. Plus that Zach Rosenblatt tweet the other day that said they're probably going to keep most of the defensive staff until the DC is hired, and then they're going to go over their staff changes, and Harris might probably stay anyway. So those were the only reasons that I would push back that Chris Harris is not necessarily like a harbinger of bad news for the Jets. But I do agree, it's not an attractive position. If Wink Martindale and his agent are doing all of this to get the job, it kind of tells you where the Jets are at in terms of attraction.
Well, with Harris, you would have still covered one half of the Rooney Rule if you didn't give him a second interview. My initial comp to it was like, okay, how the Jets gave Jeff Ulbrich a head coaching interview. He was still in the building. A lot of candidates the Jets were interested in, Aaron Glenn included, who they obviously ended up hiring. He was in the playoffs. They weren't able to get him in the building for some time. So the second interview was really where I was perplexed, so to speak, because first one, I understand you're doing right by the guy. He might remain on the staff, like you said. The second one where it's like, okay, typically a second interview for the C job in particular, that indicates that they're a finalist. And that scares me. If Chris Harris is a finalist for this DC job, like, damn, that's quite telling. Not only how unattractive the job is, but how little pull and say that Aaron Glenn has around the league, contrary to what he led many fans to think last offseason. Now I want to go over to the NFL draft. Obviously, the national championship wrapped up on Monday. The Cinderella story for Indiana, one of the worst programs in college football just a couple years ago. A perfect season, capped it off with a national title. In Indiana aside, Fernando Mendoza, D'Angelo Pons, Elijah Surratt, all those guys push them to the side. The big name, in my opinion, on the Miami side of things, who really showcased his ability, was Rueben Bain. And I think that is someone fans should really have their eyes set on. We could talk about his small arms. He is someone who I think is a natural fit with the Jets at number 2. He's every bit of 6'4" and 270 pounds, 273, whatever he is officially listed as. And look, frankly, I don't care about his arm length. If he is racking up 80 pressures in a season, if he is consistently getting the backfield, doing it on the biggest stage against the national championship, against the national champions, against Fernando Mendoza, against that brick wall up front that is the Hoosiers' offensive line, I want that guy. I want him on this team. And look, edge is such a position of need. If you draft him, the pushback I've heard is, well, what do you do with Will McDonald? You move him into a situational third down role, because I hate to say it, Jet fans, but that is what Will McDonald is. He is nothing more than that in the NFL. He had the double-digit sack year. Fans got excited, rightfully so. And then we saw this year that he is not an every down edge rusher. He is one of the worst run defenders in the NFL coming off the edge, and he was a meh pass rusher. Like, he's a third down situational guy like Bryce Huff was for those couple seasons with the Jets. So Rueben Bain, DT, your thoughts on him? Where do you have him ranked in play at number 2?
Yeah, Rueben Bain has to be in play at number 2, and not just based on the national championship, but the full body of work. I mean, let's start off. You're coached by Jason Taylor at Miami, so that's already a first positive sign. And I would love for Jason Taylor to need just another reason to vote or to root for the Jets alongside his son Mason. Now, in terms of the player, you mentioned it, the length. Like, in terms of arm size, yeah, it's an outlier. And perhaps Darren Muji, when he, that viral clip that's going around when he was with Denver talking about thresholds, and if they don't meet a certain requirement, we have to weigh it heavier, maybe knock him a point here or there. Maybe that happens with Rueben Bain, but like my whole like narrative with him is, and I haven't done the full tape study. I think I've only done like the first game of their playoffs because I didn't know how far they were going to go. So I did the first game of their playoffs, and I was like, where's the play where he loses because of his length? Now I can tell you where he loses because of like change of direction, or maybe he's just not able to like get the agility up to get to the full sack, or and he just ends up getting a pressure, which is still good. But you talk about just the bend and the flex for a guy his size, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's kind of silly for Bain. So like, I don't know if like he'll end up being the best non-quarterback on the board when it's all said and done, but his name is certainly in that ring to be that guy. And if that's the pick at 2, I certainly like it. It would signal they're probably staying, I guess, with a 4-3, but you could go 3-4 and make him more of a D end. I don't know if that really fits the mold for like how much weight you would have to put on him, which I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. So perhaps they just stick with a 4-3 front with a Rueben Bain across from Jermaine Johnson, and then you have Will come in as your DPR type on third down, and that would be really fun. So I'm totally in play for Rueben Bain. We just found out today he will be in Mobile, so me,
Yes.
Jake, and Dom will get to see him up close. I'm sure it will only be for one day. I am
Yep.
like almost positive because of how good he is that it might only be for one day, but Tuesday, all afternoon, all eyes
Yes.
are on 4. And I'm very excited to see
Mhm.
him and Akeem Mesidor, his running mate, across on the defensive line, because they will
Yeah,
both be in
absolutely.
Mobile.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you talk about the edge rushers in this year's class, Rueben Bain not only is my number one edge rusher, he is the number one guy that I want the Jets to covet with that number 2 pick. Now, assuming the Jets obviously don't take a quarterback, even in the outlook that it is right now, assuming Mendoza goes number 1 overall, every single
Mhm.
prospect the Jets pick at number 2, no matter who it is, it's going to be viewed as a reach. I think they need
Yeah.
to get the best football player available. I do think that's Bain. I like David Bailey. He's not number 1 for me. I like Arvell Reese. I hear all the Arvell Reese buzz. I think my biggest takeaway is I don't think a lot of people who are tooting Arvell Reese's horn have watched a ton of them, because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the Jets need linebacker help. Get Arvell Reese. He is not a
Yeah.
inside linebacker. He was terrible in coverage. There's no way around it. I don't know if you've watched too much of him in coverage, DT, but he was
Mhm.
awful. Just looking at it as analytics, watching a few of his games, he was terrible in coverage. He's going to be an edge rusher at the next level. Okay, that is what the team drafting him is going to want him to be. I would rather take the guy in Rueben Bain, who is 6'4" and 270 pounds, who was second in the FBS in pressures, second in sacks, a complete player, than someone in Arvell Reese who really only had one steady year of production and finished the season with 8 sacks. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion. Look, I'm all
Yeah.
for the people who want Arvell Reese, and I understand the take there. I hear the Micah Parsons comps and things like that. Just not what I'm looking for. Now, I
Mhm.
want to talk about quarterback position. I want to start with Carson Beck, because I don't know if you said this. I can't verify this. I haven't heard you say it yourself, but I heard some rumblings. I was listening to another show a couple days ago, and I heard that someone said that you said, so a birdie told a birdie told a birdie
Through
that
the
you don't think,
grapevine.
yeah,
Yeah.
through the grapevine, that you don't think Carson Beck is going to get drafted. Explain. Explain, TT.
I did jokingly say Carson Beck is a UDFA, only because I think the conversation was going more towards like he was playing himself into a top 2 round pick. And I'm like, we can't get there. We can't get there with Carson Beck. You
No.
can't convince me that he should be anything more than a day 3 pick. So rounds 4 and on. And truthfully, I would say I wouldn't even touch him with the 103rd pick that the Jets have. I don't see it with Carson Beck. He's been in the college ranks for a long time. I get it. He has a lot of starts under his belt. You can't go out like that the way you did. And I'm not basing it all just on that one ugly throw to end the game in the national championship, but after all the experience you have, after all the throws you've banked as a quarterback, that's what you end up with against Indiana in the most crucial time when you had time on the clock. You force the cover 2 throw down the left sideline. I don't know. Like, it just shows to me that, like, and he has a lot of leadership problems, in my opinion. He's thrown wide receivers under the bus at the podium before. I don't think he is a good NFL quarterback as much as he was a solid college quarterback. So no, he's around 5 to 7 guy for me. If he was a UDFA just like Brady Cook, it wouldn't surprise me, because people said Brady Cook should have got drafted, and I agreed with them there. And I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? 5th to 7th round seems fine for Brady. He ends up going undrafted. I could just see the path for Carson Beck, and I don't think the national championship did him any favors.
Sure, but I also think NFL teams are going to look at his whole body of work. There are teams
Mhm.
that I'm sure have been scouting Carson Beck since 2022, when he first really burst onto the scene at Georgia. Look, he's not someone I'm all in on. He's a Trinidad Chambliss type guy for me. Day 2, day
Mhm.
3, a lot of
Okay.
experience.
Yeah.
His arm talent is what stands out to me. Like his just ability to drive the ball downfield. He could layer it. Actually, his deep accuracy is something I really like. On top of the arm strength, I think it's too often we see quarterbacks now with these crazy strong arms who aren't great at the deep game accuracy wise. They have the strength, they have the capability, but they're unable to
Mhm.
complete passes consistently. He has a 44% completion rate on his passes of 20 plus yards. That is 14th among 80 qualified quarterbacks in the FBS. So I think that's a really intriguing nugget. I think he's a pretty quick processor of the field, but then there are a lot of cons.
Mhm.
Like I'm not going to overlook those. His mobility is below average. His effectiveness takes a big seat back when he's under pressure. He can't really create off script, which is an issue for me. So, look, I'm not saying Carson Beck at 16. I'm not saying Carson Beck at number 2, 33 or 44. None of that. I'm just saying, like, he's a late day 2 guy. He's an early day 3 guy. He is someone who will be taken on day 2 or day 3 in a very, very weak quarterback class where a lot of teams need a lot of quarterbacks. Now, I'm going to walk that back. I don't mean to say weak. I've kind of made that mistake one too many times. Thin quarterback class is what I'm looking for. Not weak.
Yeah.
We could have the debate whether it's strong or not and the comps to Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett class, things like that. But it's very thin. There's no denying that. It's a very thin class. So my question to you as we kind of wrap things up right here on the show, quarterback wise, I know we spoke about Bain at number 2. Quarterback wise, who are you looking at and where are you looking at them?
I would have to look at Ty Simpson at 2. You'd have to put him in the conversation. I'm not saying he should be the absolute pick. It would come with a lot of conviction that you have the plan in place to do that. So like me having the confidence as an armchair GM, I know the plan in place to get Ty Simpson to be, an above average passer in his rookie contract. Do the Jets have that? I don't know. So you need the conviction. You need the plan in place for Ty Simpson at 2. You could totally convince me at 16, like Mel Kiper just mocked. You could totally convince me at 16 that he is worth the pick, because if the Rams and the Steelers, historically good franchises, like if they're going to do it, the Jets need to emulate good franchises to become a good franchise, right? They're not the Rams. They're not the Steelers. I'm not saying that, but like they need to emulate good teams to become a good team. You can't just do the Jet thing and take an off-ball linebacker, even though he's generational, and he ends up being Jamal Adams like 2.0 at a linebacker position. You know what I mean? Like you can't just bank on those things. So like you have to take your swings where you can. So Simpson at 16, you can convince me. I don't think he makes it to 33, but if you can trade up from 33, maybe you do that. I would love to trade down from 33 if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I would take, and I'm really intrigued to see him next week down in Mobile, Garrett Nussmeier. I am so intrigued because the way you're talking about Beck in that day 2, maybe like late day 2 range, I kind of like that for Garrett Nussmeier. And we've seen this progression before. Jackson Dart just did it last year. He got all the way up to 26 with the Giants because he had a really good pre-draft process, a really good Mobile week. Stood out amongst all the other quarterbacks. I remember Richie from Jets Media was, blasting the Dart love all week. I remember. So if Garrett Nussmeier can do a little bit of that and go back to what made him, looked at really highly last year, maybe that will help him get into like that 44-ish pick range. So I think I'm watching out for Nussmeier on day 2. I mean, Chambliss is begging to go back to school, but I would draft him at 44. I wouldn't do it at 33 unless, somebody was really trying to trade up. I would trade out of that spot and let somebody take Chambliss, but I would take him at probably 44. But it comes with a lot of red flags. So, I would try to get a round 1 or round 2 guy, because the outlier outside of that, you're wasting a draft pick. We've done the numbers. We've done the probability on, okay, how often are you going to find a Dak Prescott or a Brock
and who are
Purdy?
the Jets to rewrite history as well?
I
hate to use that.
Right.
I hate to do that. Use that as an excuse, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Like if any team is going to do it and develop the quarterback the right way, it's not going to be Charles London and Aaron Glenn.
No, you're betting on an outlier coach. Yeah. You're betting on an outlier coach with an outlier quarterback to get high level production, and that's just not. Yes, that is more of the Jets thing than it is to try to take a swing at like a Ty Simpson and say, hey, we think we can get the most out of him. And you know what, if it doesn't work, then so be it. But they're at least not trying to just burn a 4th round pick on like a Carson Beck or a Kate Klubnik, in my opinion, and just be like, yeah, it's not going to work. And if we have to put him in, cover your eyes for the last 6 weeks of the season.
Absolutely. Dylan, thank you so much for the time, man. Appreciate you hopping on. Everyone drop down below, smash the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. DT is going to be down in Mobile with Dom and Jake, I believe. So be sure to follow him on Twitter, live updates from Mobile at D Tereman. Follow him on YouTube as well. Doing some great stuff over there at Dylan Tereman. DT, again, thank you for the time, brother. You got any final thoughts here before we wrap the show up?
No, Connor, I'm so excited. Next week is the start of it, right? All the teams are going to be in one centralized location.
Except the Rams and the Jags, but 30, yes.
But they do send personnel members, but not the GMs, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, it's always a fun week, and I can't wait. There will be some crazy news bomb that happens Monday or Tuesday, so be on the lookout for that. It always happens once all these minds get into the same area. News just keeps flowing. That's when the Rex Hogan news came out was the first day of Mobile. The Aaron Rodgers stuff was, started at Mobile as well. So it will make its rounds throughout that week, and I'm so excited. But yeah, keep it all checked in on my YouTube channel, excuse me, at Dylan Tereman. Just hit over 1,400 subs, so I certainly
Hell yeah.
appreciate everybody. And yeah, tons of content coming out.
Absolutely. Dylan, thank you so much for the time, man. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for us. For DT, I'm Connor Long right here on NY Flight Jets Talk, saying have a great rest of your day, everyone. And as always, JTS, baby. Jets, Jets, Jets. Peace out, folks.